Hi everyone, our guest today is Patrick Kurniawan. He's a researcher at the Habibie Center and the research associate at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies here at the National Chengchi University in Taipei. Patrick, welcome to the show. First question I would like to ask you is, how do Indonesia and Malaysia try to carve their niches in the semiconductor market?
I think let's start with, I think it's very important to distinguish between the semiconductor industries in Indonesia and in Malaysia. They are clearly in two different stages. The chips industries in Malaysia started in the 70s. The country specialized in assembly, testing, and packaging, or ATP stages in semiconductor supply chain. Although the government had made it very, very clear that they eventually wants to move up at the higher value at the value chain in the semiconductor sector. Malaysia already have two designated and relatively quite established industrial areas dedicated for semiconductor productions. They are in Penang and in Kulim, I believe. And lately, the Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, already seemed to double down on his semiconductor initiative and have continued to court major chips corporation like Intel from obviously from the US and Infineon from Germany, or even Chinese companies such as Xfusion, Star5, and Tongfu Microelectronics. They're currently also expanding their operations in Malaysia. Comparatively, the chips industry in Indonesia is relatively quite young. It's way less established compared to the chips industries in Malaysia. It's only recently that the Indonesian government actually made real efforts to establish a semiconductor ecosystems in the country. So far, we have only one industrial parks for semiconductor production. It's in Batam, so a couple hours away from Singapore. Indonesia also received investment from the previously mentioned German Infineon companies, but it seems that the company themselves sees better prospect in Malaysia because recently they just announced a plan to build the biggest and largest semiconductor plant in Kulim, which is a much bigger investment to what they have already been invested in Indonesia. So even the companies that are investing in Indonesia seems to have see better prospects in Malaysia. So I think it's important to distinguish that these two countries are in extremely different stages for semiconductor ecosystem. So on one hand, you have Malaysia, a country that have decades of experience in the chip sector and continue to climb up the rank in the semiconductor value chain. And on the other hand, you have Indonesia, this young country that recently started our journey in the semiconductor ecosystem. We do see potential in semiconductor industry. That's why the Indonesian government tried to enter the semiconductor industries, and it's currently utilizing the Indonesia's massive natural resources and also massive labor resources as one of our advantage to try to catch up to existing players in the region, such as Malaysia, Vietnam, and obviously Singapore as well.
We've recently observed the rise of Vietnam in the semiconductor production. Please tell us, is this thanks to the influx of Chinese capital and manufacturing, and this thanks to American sanctions on China?
I think that's a great question. I will preface by saying Vietnam is also in a higher value chain compared to Indonesia. They started in early 2000s, so even though a little bit later than Malaysia and Singapore, but they have certainly created their niche in the region. But I would answer that question by saying it's definitely a combination of factors. It's definitely not just the American sanctions on China. But I would say that the tech war between the US and China is clearly a factor that propelled the rapid success of the Vietnamese semiconductor industry. But in order to take advantage for such opportunity, I think the Vietnamese government deserves a lot of credit for being able to position Vietnam amidst the tech war between the US and China. So what Vietnam has that Indonesia and Malaysia do not have is their geographical positions. What I meant by that is because they exist in such a close proximity with China that have the largest chip market in the world. It makes Vietnam such an intriguing destination for investment, not only for Chinese companies but also for foreign companies. This is prior to the tech war for Western companies to build up their hubs in Vietnam, because they're going to sell most of their stuff to the Chinese market anyway. So before the tech war, there already is an interesting destinations for investment, and not only that, but Vietnam also have comparatively quite cheap labor prices even compared to China. So that's why some companies even prefer to invest in Vietnam even prior to the tech war. But not only that, I think the government is quite aggressive at giving many incentives such as tax exemptions, preferential tax rates, and land rental exemptions, the duty exemptions for semiconductor productions, which makes the country even more lucrative for investment destination. So to answer your question, no, I don't necessarily think that it's because of the American sanctions to China, but it certainly is an important factor that facilitate the growth for Vietnam. That not only the government already have a serious ambitions in semiconductor industry, but they're also geographically blessed with major advantage in human and natural resources. And one last thing that I want to point out is that it's also due to their excellent foreign policy strategy. I'm sure perhaps in your channel you talk about perhaps bamboo diplomacy that Vietnam implement before. It's the idea of finding delicate balance between the U.S. and China and continue to playing between those lines that just continues to make Vietnam as an not only as an excellent investment destination but also as a potential ally both for U.S. and China in the region. So they have interest to continue to court Vietnam as the next semiconductor hub for the country.
So we could say that we have three major players here in Southeast Asia. We have Malaysia first, then we have Vietnam, and then Indonesia, right?
Oh yeah, probably Singapore at the top, and then you have Malaysia, Vietnam.
Okay.
And I would say the fourth place is up for grabs for now. I don't think Indonesia is necessarily like established themselves as the fourth player in the region.
Thank you very much. How impactful are the American sanctions on the Chinese industry?
You basically sum up the general discussions on such question. Yes, I think there's a lot of different answers. Different experts have different opinions on the matter. But I think it's funny that you should mention that because I wrote a piece for the Pacific Forum on that exact topic. So the American is implementing the FDPR, so we call that a foreign direct product rule. So this is essentially the U.S. primary sanction strategy against China. And I believe it has clearly impacted China in a major way, whether that's for the best or for the worst, we can talk about that later. But not only that, they cannot access any advanced chip technology from the US. This includes companies such as Intel or AMD, which are world leaders in microprocessors. And you need microprocessors to produce PC, to produce even phones. So they lost access to Intel and AMD processors. But not just American companies. To the FDPR, China also lost access to many of US ally countries like technology. So, for example, the Dutch company ASML, if you ever heard that before, on a 80% market share for lithography machines and 100% market share for extreme ultraviolet lithography machine, which you definitely need to make a advanced chips. So without this machine right now, it's just not possible to manufacture any advanced chip. And not just that, I know you're currently staying in Taiwan. We cannot forget about TSMC. That according to the last report, on around 60% market share for semiconductor productions and 90% market share for the most advanced productions of chips. So China also lost access to that. So compare the TSMC market share to the China's SMIC market share. That's only, I think, 6 to 5% market share in chips productions, and many of those percentage is coming from their own domestic market. So imagine losing all that access all at once. So it's definitely left a major impact to the Chinese industry, regardless of what other experts believe. But the debate doesn't seem to circle on that. The debate is more like, so is China losing this access is actually good for China long term, or is it bad for China long term? I think there's a lot of way that you can answer that. I think it also depends on the future potential of what the Chinese government is implementing and how successful they are at implementing their program. But I do want to emphasize that the US strategy will not be enough to kill Chinese technology industries, because China by itself is the largest domestic market for technological products, and specifically for semiconductor, which means due to the nature of how the government functions, they can easily probably force Chinese companies and also their Chinese customers to only purchase Chinese homegrown products. So having full access to the domestic market that are unable to purchase foreign products is already enough to keep the companies afloat. So I don't think that's going to kill Chinese companies. And beyond that, I think the Chinese government is more than capable to continue to provide funds to support R&D for Chinese technology tech companies. That's what they're doing with Made in China 2025, and they continue to give more funds for technology companies right now. But I think it will be eventually a race against time because other companies will continue to innovate as well. The question is, will eventually China catch up, or will they left behind? I think that's the questions that we have to answer. My money is I don't think they won't catch up, but that's okay for Beijing. I don't think China will catch up, but as long as they can manufacture a fully functioning essential tech such as PC and phones, I think that's okay for Beijing. But the problem is on the defense side, right? So if they lost access to all of those advanced chips, that means that defense capacity will severely be underpowered compared to the US. I think this is precisely what Washington is aiming for and what the CCP should be concerned about.
Dear viewer, this important video deserves wider exposure. Please help me fight algorithm suppression by liking, commenting, and sharing it widely. Together we will make a difference.
How is Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation and Huawei doing?
The thing is, like, while they're trying to catch up, the other companies will continue to innovate as well. So by the time they catch up in like 5 years, we're already somewhere else. I think that's the point. But I think you mentioned such a great point. Like they're trying very, very hard to catch up at the moment because they don't have other options. They cannot lose access to the technology. Just like what I said earlier, I think their security will be severely underpowered. Now we use AI for ballistic missiles and stuff like that. So with them losing access to all of this kind of stuff, anything that the CCP is trying to achieve at the moment, even with the issues in Taiwan Strait and also South China Sea, I think their let's say their defense capacity to also be a little bit more aggressive to achieve those goals are becoming a lot more unrealistic with losing access to the technology.
Thank you very much. Please tell us, how does the US investment industry stack up against China's? Because the US has its CHIP Act, so does the EU. How much do the Western powers invest in Asia versus the Chinese government?
It's always our problem with the American presence in Southeast Asia. It seems that most of their focus is on the defense side. But in Southeast Asia, we're trying to catch up economic-wise to the rest of the world. So when China came in and brings BRI and invests a lot of monies, so of course the Southeast Asian countries was like, okay, well, of course we welcome all the investment from China. But I think that starting from the Biden administration, they're starting to head to that direction. So they promised us, I think, a $7 billion plan for Vietnam on semiconductor industries. Recently, they came to Indonesia and also announced that Indonesia is one of the 7 priority countries to work with the US to build semiconductor hub. They have a lot of initiative together with Malaysia and also Singapore on semiconductors. I think they are heading to that direction. But just again, the nature of the Chinese government, their investment is just much faster when it comes to bureaucracy and all of that. So I think there's a lot that I think the American can learn from China as well in terms of foreign direct investments in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of lesson learned, but Southeast Asian countries need to also realize the gravity of Chinese investments, because at times it's not just purely investment. There are strategic interests that encapsulates those investments. So I think hopefully whoever the next leader of the US is going to be, hopefully they will still consider Southeast Asia as an important destination for investment. Otherwise, China will continue to be the most influential player in the region.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you about another topic. Indonesia moving its capital to a new place, and also about Indonesian smart cities.
Let me preface this by saying I'm not an expert on this issue, but as an Indonesian, it's almost impossible to escape news about the Nusantara capital. We call them IKN. So it's almost impossible to discuss that. A lot of the diplomat that came to our centers usually come in and asking about this question. So I'll try to answer that question to the best of my ability. So let me start by saying that there have been many controversies about the project, from the project lead resigning for no clear reason. Some claims they have not been paid by the government officers, and then there are some government officers that are refusing to move to IKN because of some claim of black magic. This is a real news. You can actually read this in South China Morning Post. I think it's quite funny. And then, okay, let's start with Jokowi first. So this is clearly his project. He announced it during his second term that we're going to move our capital from Jakarta to Nusantara. The idea of moving capital from Jakarta to Nusantara in Kalimantan is not a new idea. In fact, it's been there since the first president, President Sukarno. The idea of moving Indonesia capital from Jakarta to Nusantara. Why? It's because, well, Jakarta is not right in the middle of Indonesia, which makes it difficult because for people that are coming from, let's say, Papua or like the eastern part of Indonesia to come to the capital, it takes so long. But the Nusantara capital is strategically located in the middle, so you can understand why. And there's obviously, perhaps you have heard about this before, but Jakarta is sinking. It's because of a lot of bad infrastructural decisions that have been made decades in the past. So I think it's a decision that eventually have to be made, and I would gladly say I actually support the decision to move Indonesia capital to Nusantara. However, I don't necessarily agree with the way the government is executing the plan to move to IKN. So I think the budget that is required to move the capital is around 35 billion USD. Some reports say 30 billion, some reports say 32 billion USD. But only 20% of that budget come from state budget. So 80% of this budget coming from private entities, so domestic companies and obviously foreign direct investment. Let me emphasize by saying we have yet to receive any foreign investors for the project. We have heard many news regarding countries showing interest in investing in the IKN project since last year, but to this day, like there's no one exact country that will invest in IKN, and it does seem like China remains the front runner, but they still have not signed anything that indicates they're going to be the primary the primary investor for the project. But the problem with this is that on August 17th, which last month, which is Indonesia Independence Day, the government spent massive budget just to help independence ceremony both in Jakarta and also in Nusantara. I personally think the budget for the ceremony can be better utilized to build the infrastructure in IKN rather than conducting the ceremony in IKN. We don't even have a clean water source in IKN yet, and they forced to have ceremony there. So I think there are a lot of questions over the validity of the project and the decisions to implement the project overall. Now the president-elect Prabowo, he has made commitments to continue the IKN project. In fact, that was a major part of his presidential campaign. He even took Jokowi's eldest son as his vice to even further prove that he's going to continue Jokowi's project, which includes IKN, obviously. But recently, some media has reported that he has shown less and less interest to IKN. Perhaps it was just a promise to gain Jokowi's voters, but ultimately, perhaps he doesn't feel invested enough on the project. And even Prabowo himself has many projects of his own. Like he promised to have a free lunch campaign. He promised to implement a downstreaming policy for a lot of Indonesia's key industries, which just, well, to be fair, there's no such thing as free lunch. Even if he's able to implement such policy, it's not free lunch, it's reallocations of budget. So it's just moving another budget to his free lunch project. So with all of that, let's say, with all of that initiative that he wants to achieve, where does his priority comes in IKN? So there's a lot of questions that we have yet to answer. Prabowo will take into office in October, so next month. So we'll see what his view on IKN really is.
This channel is my passion, and yet those videos take time and effort to make. By liking this video, you can help push the ever-hostile algorithm in my favor. I'm very grateful for it.
Does this plan have support then domestically or not? Because it doesn't seem like that. Maybe the plan itself does, but the way the government is executing it, I think it would. You said you support it, but what does the populace say?
Oh, I think if we look at the result of the presidential campaign, it does seem like a populist project because people eventually vote for Prabowo, and one of his key promises was to continue the IKN project. So yes, I think it's a populist ideas and populist initiative, but Jokowi's Jokowi approval rate severely dropped down in the last month. So I don't know if it still remains populist after this month. A little bit of background. So Jokowi tried to nominate his second son as a governor of Jakarta, but he was a little bit too young. So they're trying to change the rule, just like they did with vice presidents, and a lot of people were angry with that. We have huge demonstrations in Jakarta. Eventually dropped down. So the plan to change the age actually dropped down because of how angry the public was towards the decision. So Jokowi approval rate severely dropped right after that. It was quite high even during the presidential campaign. So there is that, but that's not necessarily related to IKN campaign, right? So if we just look at the promise of IKN, I think it still remains quite a populist project. And the problem with IKN is that there's not a lot of reports that you can read about the progress of IKN project. So with Indonesian citizens, because we don't really know what actually going on in the government side when it comes to Nusantara project, we just see all of this campaign and marketing about this new smart cities that are going to be one of the most advanced cities in the world. A lot of people, I guess, can relate to that and support the idea. But again, from my point of view, I think it's long overdue. Jakarta, I think the capital has to move, but to what extent? That's just the question. Do you really need to build that advanced of a city just to move your capital? For example, Washington and New York City. New York City is definitely way more advanced compared to Washington, because it's just for administration. The same for South Korea as well. You have Seoul and you have Sejong City. Sejong City is the administration capital of South Korea. And again, you don't need to build such an advanced city to support that activities. So in my opinion, I don't necessarily think you need to do that either in Nusantara, because Nusantara is not a existing city. It's genuinely a forest at the beginning. So you have to cut down a massive part of the forest and then build an entirely new city. You don't even have a clean water source. Why do you have to build something from the ground up? It just doesn't make sense to me, especially with so many issues that Indonesia are currently facing. So yes, capital has to move, but I think hopefully the next government can execute the plan much better.
Patrick, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your insight. It was really very, very interesting. Thank you.
I have so many other explosive interviews on this and similar topics. Please check out my channel.